everybody. Welcome to the Employee Storyslam. Yay, woo! So Blaine has been bragging a lot about how fun the morning session was. So no matter what happens in here, I want you to tell him that this was like amazing, so funny. Jenny and I's banter is just going to be like over the top. Let's see. So how many of you have never been to a Storyslam before? Okay. So maybe we should go over the rules. Jenny?
That's my job. That's my job is to tell you what the rules are.
Jenny, it's banter time.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay, so the rules are pretty simple. The story has to be true, and you have to tell it in under 7 minutes.
And why don't you tell the lovely audience what will happen if the story goes over 7 minutes?
So, okay, if it goes over 7 minutes, you're going to hear me shake this baby rattle. Can you all hear this? That's pretty loud? Okay. I've been practicing, so feel free to compliment me on my rattling skills.
You're doing a really good job. Okay, so I think that wraps up the rules. So just so everybody knows, this is being recorded. If you're a teller and you would prefer not to be in the recording, Blaine can edit you out. You just need to let him know. And Jenny, I guess we can begin. Jenny is going to be pulling names out of a hat.
It's actually a basket, just for factual.
Okay.
All right, our first story is going to be Jill S.
Yay, Woo-hoo! Jill S. Come on down. Come on. It's going to be good.
Don't make me rattle you, Jill.
Would you like to use the mic stand, or would you like to be warm?
Stood in front of my group.
Oh, you're going to be great.
Do you feel like you want to move around or not?
I don't know.
As you can see, it's a very nice dress.
No, I guess.
You're going to take it.
I don't know. We'll see.
We can.
Okay. So, hello. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So some of you may not know me very well, but I really love animals. And I love wildlife. I love to go see animals in the wild. That's pretty much what all my travel plans are about. And I've had some really amazing encounters with wildlife. And I've got 4 species on this card. If I can get through them, they're all pretty fun, good stories, I think. But I normally tell them in much smaller groups. So I really love killer whales, orcas. I try to call them orcas because people have this negative connotation about killer whales because they don't really kill humans. They kill sometimes other sea mammals. But I love the black and white. They're so beautiful, and I've loved them since I was a teenager. And I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I was no good at science and math. And so then I wanted to be a SeaWorld trainer and train killer whales, but that really never happened. So anyway, so I just decided I would go places to see these animals. And so I found a place that's close to me, San Juan Islands, and they have lots of orcas around there. They have some resident local, okay, I'm taking too long with this part. Okay, anyway. So there's a county park, San Juan County Park, and you can actually sit in the park and watch whales go by. It's amazing. And so one year we brought our kayaks, and we saw whales way out there, and we just ran for the kayak and went and jumped in the kayak. And what you're supposed to do is you're not supposed to interfere with them. You're not supposed to cross their path because that's rude. You're not supposed to do anything like that. So we had to tuck up into the kelp and stay back. And whatever the whales did, the whales did. If they got too close to us, that's their choice. So what actually happened is there were two bull whales, and which is males with big, tall dorsal fins. They came, they were coming at us, and it was like exciting and scary. And even though I knew they didn't eat people, I was like still scared to death, but so excited because I'm the kind of person that always wants to jump out of the boat to be with the whales. So I mean, it's hard to keep me in the boat. So they were coming, these two males right at us, and I turned around and looked at my spouse and I said, if this is the way I go, I'm okay with it. And that was, that was really awesome. So what they ended up doing is they ended up coming to us and then going under the boat and then away. So they didn't get real close. They were probably within 30 feet. It was awesome. It was still a cool experience. Also had a wonderful experience with brown bears. In Alaska, they call them brown bears. Here we call them grizzlies. I was at a place called Bear Camp on Lake Clark National Park. And it's an area that has bears in the mountains and in the ocean. I mean, there's ocean there, there's mountains, it's just really beautiful setting. It's not like the salmon or the waterfalls that you see in a lot of Alaska pictures, but because these bears actually eat clams, and they get them from the sand. So anyway, I was at a place up on a lookout, and we counted all the bears that we could see, and they look like cows grazing, and there were 64 of them. Whoa. And I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. And so then we went down, we were walking, and we had a bear guide with us, and he had a weapon, and he had pepper spray, but they never really used these things because these bears have never been hunted. So these bears are not really afraid of people. So anyway, so there was this juvenile bear, which is like a teenager, and it came from, the meadows, crossed the stream, came over right to where we were. There were probably a dozen of us standing there, and he came, it was like a puppy coming up to us. I mean, it was just the cutest thing. And then he came right up to a tree, kind of like here, and started scratching his back. And he was not 5 feet from me. I mean, he was right there, and the bear guide was in front of me, and then I was behind him, and he had his hand on his pepper spray, and he just goes, whoa. And he tells the bear, whoa, go away, because he was all of a sudden, he realized if that bear falls over, he's going to fall on us. So I got to see a bear that close. It was really awesome. So anyway, those are two of my few stories that I have about close encounters with wildlife. So.
Wow, thanks, Jill. I want to go on vacation with you. Sounds amazing. I have also had the experience of being in a kayak and seeing whales and being at first let's go over to them. And then you're going over to them and you're like, oh, this is really scary because they're really big. Yeah, but that's super cool. That sounds like amazing. Both of those stories sound amazing. Okay, Jenny, who's our next teller?
No, who is it?
I don't know. Why don't you pull it out of the hat?
It's only a hat if I wear this thing on my head. I'm not planning
It could
on
be a
doing
hat. It could be a hat.
It could. Ethan is our next storyteller.
Yay, Ethan, come on down.
Epic fan.
I was kind of a late addition to this, so I didn't have anything planned. The topic is travel, right? I believe. Okay. So I'll kind of just talk about I think this story is somewhat relevant now because we've done the workshop on microaggressions, and a lot of these I was going to kind of just share and tell some stories about my time in Honduras, where I went for a semester in college. And the area that I went to was like very much like remote up in the mountains. There was no electricity. I mean, I guess, you know, if you were to clarify things as like third world, like that's probably what it was. And so there was some running water in some places. They had like a very elaborate like system of black hoses that, like, if you looked in the air, what you would normally think were like, oh, those power lines, they were like water hoses that they had like strung up everywhere that would kind of go down to people's houses if they were fortunate to have them. Not everybody had them. But it was an amazing experience. There's so many things that are really different and interesting, and you learn a lot about yourself, especially if you go to like another country and you don't necessarily like speak the language, and it's a country that you're not really familiar with the customs, because like as Americans, as an American white male, I feel like I can just go anywhere and be like, well, I'm a white man here, people, like why aren't you listening to me, kind of thing. And like we were there to like work on projects, and one thing we found out really quick is like even like what little training we had, like the people that we were working with like knew way better like how to build and construct the things than we did. And part of it was for us to learn. I was like, well, wait a minute, the instructions go like this. And they would look at me like, oh God, and they would look at each other like, he wants us to do that, like that's not good. And so we would just kind of have to be like, okay, yeah, no, that's cool. I got you. Like you kind of have to like check yourself, because after a while it's sort of like, I don't want to like, are we allowed to curse? We can't. I won't curse. I was like, I don't want to, F this up for them. Like this is a really important project for them. And so, we built like latrines, pilas, which were like sinks. We did fogons, which were kind of like stoves that we made with like chimneys going out of folks' houses. And we did all sorts of different projects, built like chicken coops. It was really cool, but I think the main important part was like the cultural exchange. I mean, that's kind of like what it came down to a lot. And there were a lot of things that you kind of catch yourself off guard. I mean, the first thing that I definitely remembered when I got to Honduras, and I don't know if it's because of like how close we were to the equator or like the lack of pollution, but like you could just see like galaxies and like Milky Ways in the sky that like I'd never seen in the U.S. ever. And I was just sort of like, is it because we're like closer to the space? Because we're on this part of like, how come it's so beautiful down here? I've never seen stars like this. And then, when we got to the community that we were working in, it was sort of a big deal, because it was me and then a guy named Sam Adams from North Carolina. He wasn't from Boston, but and he was tall. He was like 6'3", like a pretty tall, like skinny dude. And when we had the first meeting, like I said, like this is borderline, like basically third world. Like after the first meeting, like the first question someone says, like, how are we gonna feed these guys? Like, look at that guy. Like he's enormous. He's like, what are we gonna do? And like the plan was like everybody is gonna go to a different house. They're gonna go to a different house every day and work on a project, and that family will feed them. And they're like, oh, sweet, okay, cool. But we did have a host family, and they were amazing, but they had a more advanced house, which was basically just cinder blocks. Like the most advanced kind of houses home there were cinder blocks. Most of the other folks' homes were just trees that they had cut out of like the forest. And so everybody in families kind of just like had like one or two beds, and everybody slept together because it got really cold at night, especially if you didn't have like the four walls of the cinder blocks, and even that got cold. But there's some really interesting things. Like we would go on adventures, and like we would, like every time we went to someone's house, like somewhere in this community, it was called Planes y Pacaya. It was like two different communities up in the mountains. Anytime you went somewhere, like you had to run for your life from dogs. Like every house had dogs, and they protected the homes, and like you would have to like run as fast as you could, and you're like, oh my God, like this dog is gonna get us. And like sometimes you'd be running with like 5-year-old kids. They're like, we're here to take you to the house. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, kids, run. And the kids are like kicking the dogs. And I'm like, get them, kids, get them. I'm like, because like they like weren't afraid, and I was like terrified. I was like, oh God, should we help the kids? I'm like, okay, no, the kids are fine. They scared the dogs away. Thanks, kids. And one time we were like going up into this, we were going like way up into this house was up in like the forest sort of. And there's these young kids, and they're maybe like 4 or 5. And, I was kind of like the adult there, and we're walking up, and we got to this hill, and there's a really, like a smaller kid who was maybe barely 4 or 5. And the other kids could like climb up the hill, and he couldn't get up. And I'm like, oh, like, do you want me to pick you up? Like, do you want me to pick you up or help you? And he's just like, no. And he like yelled for the other kid to give him like the machete, because everybody had machetes. Like, there's no cops, like there's no laws. Everybody has a machete. It's completely peaceful. Like, it's just, you don't have to like worry about stuff like that. And so he threw the kid the machete. I'm like, oh God, this kid's way too young to have a machete. What's happening? Like it doesn't. And then he just like started stabbing the side of the hill. And I'm like, oh God. I'm like, give me, dame la machete. I'm like, give me the machete. Like, and he just like looked at me like, dude, like you need to step off. Like I know what I'm doing. I'm like, what is going on? And what he was doing was stabbing a step like into the side of the hill with a machete, and like made his own steps and got up. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, like I just need to like shut the fuck up and like let people do what they need to do here. It's like clearly this 5-year-old knows way better how to survive out here than I do. So getting back to that, I'll try to wrap it up. One of the best ways to experience another culture, as I'm sure you all know, is like via food, and like that was a big concern. And at the time I was like vegan, and I was like part of this like anarchist collective. We just made vegan potlucks all the time or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be vegan, and I when I go down there, but I realized like that's such a privilege, of living in like an advanced like culture and society like the U.S. And so. I would say probably like 85 to 95% of what I ate was vegan, just because like that's all there was. Like there really isn't. And I was, I didn't want to come off like, well, I'm not going to eat that meat because in America we have fake soy meat, and they would just be like, what are you talking about, dude? They're like, how do you do that? I'm like, well, there's cheese that's not cheese, but I eat that cheese. they're like, what's it made of? It's like oil and vegetables, and they're like, what are you talking about? So, I basically, that's how you want to experience the culture. Like, you eat, like, as much as you can, but because, there just wasn't much, the staples were, like, handmade tortillas, rice and beans that we had most of the time. There was definitely some vegetables here and there. I'll try to wrap it up. I know I'm getting to 7 minutes. But one of the most amazing things is that every like once a month USAID would come through, and USAID does like lots of humanitarian outreach and sent food, and they would send like a massive bag of food, but it was really just beans. It was black beans, rice, and like massive cans of oil, and like that was really all they got. And people would get that once a month, but they kind of lived off that because there wasn't a whole lot there. And so one day I was like, okay, I'm gonna help. I'm like, oh, is this the food? And like the host mother was like, yeah. I'm like, do you want me to carry it up? And she's like, yeah, please. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like this big, strong American guy. I'm like, I picked it up and like spilled all the beans. And I'm like, oh shit. Like there's beans everywhere. They're in like cow manure, and like it's in cow pads. And I'm like, oh. But this is kind of like a reality check, because I was like, do you want me to pick them up? And she like looked at me and looked at them, and she's like, yeah. And so I was like, okay. So I'm sitting down and I'm like picking up black beans out of cow shit, because like that's all they have. Like it's kind of funny, but it's not. And then my one friend Stefanino came over, and like he held it up, and he's like, oh, I'll help you pick the black beans up. And so he picked it up and he took a black bean and he was like, "Esos son el carne de nosotros," and he said, "These are our meat," because like they essentially really didn't have any meat. And it made me think a lot about being vegan and kind of being privileged. And then like later that day, they made us dinner, and it was like a chicken noodle soup with like rice, because they had chickens running around their chicken coop. And I was just kind of like, oh, like I don't eat that because like I practice this type of diet. And so the chickens were running around, so I know it's completely free range, organic, blah, 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 and met all of those. But I think the thing that, was most important about it is like, not to restrict yourself, because that was probably like the best thing that I ever ate. And sometimes, what little people have, like for them, if I were to say I couldn't eat that, they'd be like, but this is the best thing we got, So I think it's important to remember that sometimes you can't let your privilege override, respect for other folks in other cultures. So thanks, everybody. I'll wrap it up. Sorry, that was way too long.
No, you did great.
Thanks, Ethan. That was great. Wow. Sounds like there's some really resourceful kids. Like, I got to work on my machete skills. I never would have thought to use a machete to make a step for myself. That is incredible. Yeah, wow.
Just use your machete for what? Murdering people, or?
Yeah, the normal stuff, right? But making steps, that's like next level. Okay, who's our next teller, Jenny?
Okay, let's see. We're just gonna mix these. Steve Reinemer.
Steve, come on down.
All right, tough acts to follow. Not really travel related, but people did have to drive to get to where this takes place. Briefly on Ethan's point about eating the meat eating thing, it reminds me when I was a kid and going to visit our relatives in Montana who lived on a ranch. My oldest brother was in his vegetarian phase, and my aunt, they had their own cattle that they made steaks from, and she announced we're having steak tonight, and my brother said, "Oh, I don't eat meat." And my aunt said, "Well, tonight you are." Anyway, so this is just a brief tale of my first job as a waiter many years ago, and book ended by sort of what we'll call the appetizer and the entree, but it's more like all-you-can-eat buffet. That's the two sides of this story. So my first job as a waiter was at this place up at a shopping mall not far from my house. I was probably about 20, 21. And they didn't do a lot of training, I don't think, in hindsight. So my first experience was helping a guy at lunch, and he was just a single fellow having a quick bite, hamburger or something, and French fries and some coffee. And so they just didn't tell me anything, I don't think. So I went out there with one of those round cork trays with round globe pot of coffee, the old school stuff. And that's how I started. I went out with the whole tray with the pot of coffee and the cup on it, and I set the whole thing down in front of him, and I left. And I think I was supposed to put the cup down and pour the coffee into the cup and then take that back to the coffee place, but I didn't do that. That's how it started, my first customer ever as a waiter. And then I brought his sandwich out with his French fries, and I didn't know to take that off. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I think I figured out I had to take it off the cork tray. I think I was about to put the whole thing down in front of him. So I was taking the plate off the tray and setting it down, and one of the French fries fell onto the tray. And in that moment, I had to make a big decision. And, this was I was kind of in my meditation period where I had learned meditation and TM, and I was kind of in the laws of nature realm, sort of. And so I saw this, and several questions crossed my mind as I looked at this French fry. Like, what do you do? Do you pick it up and put it on his plate, or do you just leave it there? But it's a big, really nice looking French fries. I would want that French fry. Or I don't know. I'm sure there's another choice in there. But so in that moment, my natural, what's the natural thing to do? Well, yes, I ate it right there. I just popped it in my mouth because it was a hot, salty French fry. So he just kind of did a double take at me and a little smile, and I left, and that was that. So that was my first customer ever. So on the other side of that, we come to a weekend night, and I have a party of about 10, and plus a few single tables with couples. So this place is a all-you-can-eat seafood restaurant where most of the stuff is deep fried. I had no real training into how to identify all the deep fried stuff. It kind of looked all the same. So at this big party, celebrating something, what my memories mainly are taking the orders. I did that okay. Take the orders, write it down. And then before I can submit the orders to the back people, sort of a buffet line to get your food with all the waiters, you have to punch it into this cash register that has all the names of the menu choices. And this thing is like huge, and there's probably 30 different little print names of the items. And it's very busy. There's people behind you in line, the other waiters who are like, that got this down, like career waiters or something. And I'm looking at this thing, and I really, it's like, I have like, 15, 20 things I'm supposed to punch into here as fast as I can. And so that, for starters, was overwhelming. I just stared at this fine print, trying to see which one was what I had on all my menu, I think all my lists. So that, I think I had to get help for that. Took a long time to work through that. I think already at that point, I was wondering if I needed to just rip my apron off and run out of the building with my hands on my head, because this was going to be overwhelming, the pressure. And then the next thing I remember is when my orders were up, they came through that line, and I really needed help to figure out which ones were mine. There was a lot of food coming up at once, and I got them all onto trays, and I had to do several different trips with trays. And I go out there to the table, and I really didn't know what was what, not at all. All the different orders, I couldn't tell you what it was on that plate. Deep fried shrimp, deep fried fish, deep fried, whatever you go to deep fried seafood restaurant. And so I would go to one side of the table, and I started by setting the tray down like this and see if I could fake them out. So I'd go, okay, so you had like he's going to tell me. And then the guy's going, I didn't order that. So I went all the way down to the other side, and I put the tray down, and I said, oh, you ordered. I did this over and over, and then I kept saying, I'm sorry. I probably said I'm sorry a million times that night, just constantly. And the people at the other little table, like the older couple sitting there, like, were watching me, I noticed, and like some of them were sympathetic. I could tell they were smiling and trying to help out as best they could. And I think I managed them okay, except I was probably very slow keeping up with them, what they needed and time-wise and all that. So that didn't go well at all. I think the guy was just totally upset, and I'm sure other waiters had to help, because I think I blocked the rest of it out, probably. And I don't know, that might have been my last time there. I think I lasted 2 weeks at that restaurant. But that's all I remember at that restaurant, were those two incidents. So that's how that went. But the good news is, after that, I found a nice, normal, very limited menu with a creperie, and you could easily see what everything was, and it came up at a window where you didn't have to go back and figure out what it was. You saw what it was, and it wasn't all you can eat. That was the other thing. They kept wanting more stuff, and it just drives you crazy. So that's it.
I think I know, I'm remembering now why I never had a waitressing job, because I don't know how I would do it with that kind of pressure. I was getting like a knot in my stomach just when you were standing at the register trying to figure it. That's great. Thank you, Steve. Oh my gosh. I don't think I would have had the courage to eat it right in front of the person. But that's probably what I really secretly would have wanted to do. I don't know. I probably would have just left it there, like act like nothing happened. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wonder if he ever tells the story of the time the waiter actually ate the French fry from his plate. Okay, I think we have one more official teller,
Yeah.
but we probably will have enough time for at least one or two more tellers. So if anybody has a story brewing.
Start building your courage now.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and have our last teller. Who is it, Jenny?
It's Laura.
Laura, come on down.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Foster. I'm kind of new here. I've been here about 6 months. And my story begins on a June morning, about 5 a.m. and I was about ready to land in Frankfurt. It was my first trip to Europe. And I had just gone through divorce and a pretty rough year where I beat myself up a lot for what I had done. I had ended a marriage. I had displaced my 2 little girls from the home that they knew, and lost a lot of friends because, they didn't know the whole story, and kind of disappointed my parents, because I had always been a good girl, but then I went and did this. And so I was really not liking myself, and I just wanted a vacation from me. And so part of the divorce settlement was my husband. He traveled constantly, so we had a bazillion miles. And he said, you can have half, or maybe I said I want half. And it was now an hour or so later, and I saw this little plaza, and I thought, I'll just sit down here and rest and write in my journal. And still, it was pretty quiet. But as I sat there for an hour or so, I started seeing people kind of entering this plaza from one side and walking kind of purposefully through it and out the other side. Enough of them that it looked like a pattern. So I waited till I saw a group of people that looked like they wouldn't notice me, because it was a bunch of older ladies just talking really animatedly to each other. So I just started walking behind them, not too creepily, but close enough to kind of keep track of them. And so they walked for a few blocks, and they come to another plaza. And I'm like, oh, this is great. There's vendors here selling food. I see coffee. I can get some food here. And I see that, they're selling used clothes and dishes and books and postcards and things like that. I'm like, oh, this is great. Now I have an agenda. I can be here for several hours, find some food, maybe take a nap on that grass over there, and my day is planned out for me. And so as I'm walking along, feeling really good because people are greeting me in German. And so I felt like, oh, my new identity, it's already starting. I'm no longer that sad American with nobody knows about what I've been doing for the last year. It's wonderful. And so there was a box of postcards, and I was just kind of absentmindedly perusing through it, flipping through them, and the smell of old postcards came up to me, and just I had this instant sense of deja vu. When I was a little kid in Illinois, my dad liked to go to he liked to wake up early on Sunday mornings. The first Sunday of the month, we would go to 7 a.m. Mass at St. Rita of Cascia Church. And then any of us kids who wanted to would join him for donuts, and then we would drive up to the Kane County Fairgrounds for the flea market. And that smell just hit me, the flea market. And then I'm like, oh, it's a flea market. It's a flea market. It's not a lice market. And I was like, oh, it's a flea market. And I started crying and laughing and just tears pouring down my face, but I was smiling, and the guy behind the counter was like, oh, poor woman. She's having a meltdown here. And so I went over on the bench, and I just sort of giggled and cried, and sat there feeling like it was like a watershed, something about it, not just the crying, but the release of feeling like this man, this kind stranger that chatted with me, he put me on this path, and it made me laugh, and it made me feel connected, and it made me feel like I had something good on the other side of that flow marked. And from then on, the trip was not an unmitigated success, but it really kind of helped me get over that hump and get my life back on track again. So thanks.
Thank you, Laura. That's such a great story. I love how travel can be like that sometimes, like you just, I don't know, sometimes you're traveling and you just meet a stranger and somehow they touch your life in this way. It can be very tangential and not seem that important, but then it is. Yeah, I think it's a great thing about travel. Okay, so that's all of our official tellers. Does anybody want to get up and tell a story? It doesn't have to be, even 5 minutes long. If you just have a shorter story that you want to tell. Do we have any takers? It's a very friendly audience. Okay. Thanks, Steve.
We do have only about 5 minutes because it's 2:40, and I think, are we supposed to be done at 2:45?
Yeah, 2:45, actually.
So it's got to be a quickie, but.
Can you do it in 3 minutes? Okay. Come on down, Steve.
Get my
again.
rattle ready.
Okay, this one does involve traveling in a car anyway. But this is just a short story of many years ago with a friend who had 2 young kids, and we were driving east towards Mount Hood, and it was probably February, and unbeknownst to us, there was apparently black ice in various spots, and when you go on 26, there are ups and downs and hills as you go. This is past somewhere before Brightwood, or somewhere past Sandy and before Mount Hood. And we were just driving along. I was driving, and we come over a hill, and we head down this hill. And as we start down the hill, it has a little curve on it. Well, the car started just skating, not taking the curve, but going off to the left ever so gently. And it was like this really crazy feeling. I don't know if you ever have been on black ice and had that sensation, but it just starts sliding ever so much. And I'm just like, just trying not to do the knee-jerk reaction with the steering wheel and not slam the brakes, but not knowing how long it will take for the car to maybe come back into my lane without getting into the lots of oncoming traffic. So, it's like one of those moments where you see your life before you and all these people in the car. So as it turned out, I was able to just get the car back on the road in the right lane, and then maybe there was a little more, but it settled down, and then when we got to the bottom of this pretty big hill, I pulled over. I just had to collect myself for a minute, and then we thought, well, what should we do? Should we go up try to get to the other side, or go up the shoulder and warn people? Because we didn't see anyone else crash or anything had happened, but it just seemed like that's just crazy. And in the end, we decided, there's too many complications. Maybe we'll get hit trying to go back up the hill, or who knows. So we didn't do that. But the next day, in the newspaper, I found a little blurb, and it said someone, in fact, had been killed in that same section. And I was looking at it, and it gave a time, and I swear the time was probably within about 5 minutes of when we were there. So it's one of those weird things like, did I do the right thing? What should I have done? Is it my fault? Should I be guilty? But it was just a weird thing, and I never did quite figure out what I should have done. But anyway, that's what happened.
Wow, Steve. Such an ethical dilemma. Wow. I'm glad you were safe, though. I'm glad. I don't know if it would have been a good idea to go back because, Anyway, who knows? Who knows? We're glad you're safe. Okay, that's the end of the employee story slam. You guys were a great audience, and let's give it up for all the tellers. So good, so funny. Smart. All right. Yeah, you're welcome.
I saw him peeking. I saw him in the corner, and he didn't trust us. Did I turn off the